Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us from the Judging for the Win Discord. Thanks to Peppy Show 92 for this one. Amy plays Ultima while Nick controls Blood Artist. Does Nick get to drain one for each creature that dies? Alright, so first off, if you're playing the version of Ultima that has reminder text, this question might have sounded pretty easy. Part of what ending the turn does is to exile all spells and abilities from the stack. This is the reason Ultima will exile itself as it resolves, despite this fact not being clearly spelled out in the card's text the way it is on most other cards that do this. I'm betting that a fair number of people saw this line and thought that it meant the Blood Artist triggers would get exiled also, but that's actually not quite right. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you probably already know the following important fact about how triggered abilities work. Any abilities that trigger during the process of a spell resolving do not get put on the stack right away. Rather, the fairies who are in charge of triggered abilities just note that they triggered on their whiteboard. The game does not put these abilities onto the stack until after all the steps of resolving that spell have been completed. So with that in mind, it sort of seems like Amy would get these triggers now. It turns out that she doesn't, but that's only because there's another rule that exists just to crush the hopes and dreams of anyone who wanted to flex their rules knowledge this way. The very first step in the process of ending the turn is that all triggered abilities that have triggered and not yet been put onto the stack will cease to exist. It is possible that some triggered abilities actually can trigger after this point, and those triggers would go on to resolve, but the Blood Artist triggers are not like this. Another fact that you would know if you've followed this channel for a while is that the steps of a spell's resolution occur in the order that they're written, meaning that Ultima destroys all the creatures and artifacts first, then ends the turn after that. So with that, let's close out with a step-by-step breakdown of exactly what happens in the situation described in the original problem statement. Just for fun, we'll say Amy also controls a Stonebinder's Familiar. Okay, an indestructible Stonebinder's Familiar, so it won't get destroyed by Ultima. Okay, so the first step of Ultima resolving is to destroy all creatures and artifacts. This will cause the Blood Artist to die, so its ability triggers. The fairies write that on their whiteboard. The next step is to end the turn. There's a specific sequence of steps that this corresponds to in the CR, and the first one, like we said before, is for all triggered abilities that have triggered to cease to exist. If you like thinking about this in terms of the fairy whiteboard analogy, we can say that the game erases everything off the whiteboard during this step. The next step is for everything on the stack to be exiled. Normally, this would just be the Ultima itself. Because it's a sorcery, there probably isn't anything underneath it on the stack, and because of what we just talked about with the triggered abilities, there probably isn't anything on top of it either. Because a card was put into exile during Amy's turn, Stonebinder's Familiar triggers. This ability is now written on the whiteboard. The next couple of steps in the process of ending the turn aren't relevant to our situation, but they're checking for state-based actions, ending the current step or phase, and skipping directly to the last step in the turn, the cleanup step. By the way, abilities that trigger at the beginning of any step or phase that's skipped over will not trigger because the step or phase that they trigger in didn't begin. It got skipped over. There's a handful of abilities that trigger at the beginning of the cleanup step, though, and any such abilities will trigger as normal. We don't have anything like that going on in this example, but if we did, when the next step rolls around, the time when triggered abilities are put onto the stack, all those triggered abilities would be put onto the stack along with the Stonebinder's Familiar ability in the same way that normally would happen. Although it's the cleanup step because the triggered ability is on the stack, players will get priority to cast spells and activate abilities before it resolves. After this cleanup step ends, the game will have another cleanup step, and if necessary, another after that, and so on until there's a cleanup step where no abilities trigger and no state-based actions are performed. After that cleanup step, the game will proceed into the next turn. If you'd like a little bit more practice about how ending the turn works, I recommend my video on how Miracle interacts with Days Undoing ending the turn. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.